And a good evening for the ones joining us from around the world. Very happy to see you all here online today. I know it's a busy week for everyone working on and in Myanmar, and we're very happy you found the time to join us today for the launch of the research and the real-time review on diaspora engagement in Myanmar. And with that, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Bea for a few words.
Good morning and good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining the launch of this research. And before we start, we just want to mention some technical things. So that you know that the Q&A function is on. If you have any questions, please write into the Q&A channel and we will address them during the Q&A session during the discussion. Since it's a Zoom webinar format, only the speakers are visible, not the participants. So the participants are muted. So we really encourage you to write your questions in the Q&A section. The event is recorded and will be made available on DEMAC's YouTube channel afterwards. And the full report will be also available on the DEMAC website on the 15th of February. You already have the executive summary that is available online. So I will quickly present you the agenda. So my colleague Alexandra will present you briefly the DEMAC initiative so that you understand the background. And then after we will jump into the findings and the recommendations of this research and including the Q&A session. And then we will end the webinar afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bea. And yeah, a few words of who we are at DEMAC. What is the Diaspora Emergency Action and Coordination Initiative? And why do we work with diaspora in humanitarian aid? The Diaspora Emergency Action and Coordination Initiative is an initiative, global initiative that is hosted by the Danish Refugee Council and funded by USAID. And what we want to is increasing awareness for diaspora humanitarian intervention. Why we focus on diaspora engagement is related to DRC's overall ambition for working with civil society and diaspora as transnational actors. So seeing that they have constructive engagement, agency space, and supporting them in this, and seeing the close links diaspora as transnational global actors do have with local communities, and as part of a broader humanitarian ecosystem, we see the role they can play in the humanitarian system, and we want to enhance, as DEMAC, the knowledge between diasporas and humanitarian actors. So we focus on making them more visible as actors, diasporas, and we really want to promote the visibility for them in the humanitarian system and build bridges between diaspora humanitarian actors and the humanitarian ecosystem with other institutional actors. We do this by enhancing knowledge between diasporas and humanitarian institutions, so focusing really on the research part. Part of this is also the real-time reviews we've done on Myanmar and other countries. We want to increase awareness on the interventions. So we usually host a lot of workshops with different actors and on different topics. And ultimately, we really want to improve the coordination, the communication and the coherence of the humanitarian response to serve better and bring better assistance to the people in need. Why do we do real-time reviews? And what do we aim at with that is, as I just mentioned, it's part of the enhancing knowledge. So assessing what is going on in a certain crisis and how diasporas engage in this. So when we look at where can we do real-time reviews, we look at, is there a change, a sudden onset crisis or a change or spike in a crisis, as we've also seen it with Myanmar lately. Is there a diaspora and is this diaspora engaged in the humanitarian response? And then we want to know, and we look at, and you will hear in a moment more about the findings there, but we look at what is the activities, what is the areas of intervention diaspora organizations have, what are the drivers, the motivations, but also the challenges they encounter in their humanitarian response And most importantly, what is the coordination among the different diaspora organizations and groups, but also the interaction with the institutional humanitarian actors. And ultimately, we really want our research to be useful and not go into a drawer. So that's why we also always make it very publicly available. We host webinars, for which we're very glad you are here today. We host a number of workshops, and we really try building on that knowledge to bring the different actors together to see how can coordination among these different groups be enhanced ultimately. And I don't want to take more space and time to talk about DEMAC. So I'm really glad to start with introducing or handing over to Bea to introduce the researchers, and then jumping right into the research and the findings. Over to you, Bea.
Thank you, Alexandra. Yes, you're all there to hear about the findings of the researchers. So I will quickly present you Alinea International. That is a professional consulting firm that provides technical and operational expertise to international development programs, especially in program design, monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning. So today we have Christina Northey, that is a humanitarian specialist with over 25 years of experience in the sector and in the field as well, as a senior program and management roles for several NGOs. And we also have Claire Boyer, I don't know if I say it correctly, who is an international development professional with experience in the delivery, monitoring, and evaluation of humanitarian and development projects across Asia, the Middle East, and the Pacific. So I hand over to Christina. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bea. And hello, everybody. As Bea mentioned, I'm a senior consultant with Alinea International based in Australia. I'll provide some brief notes on the context and methodology for the real-time review, and then hand over to Claire, who'll take you through the findings. Next slide, please. The review took into consideration that there were 3 types of migration from Myanmar: forced displacements of uprooted religious minorities and ethnic groups escaping conflict areas, Burmese elites seeking more secure political environments abroad, and thirdly, forced or voluntary migration of Burmese people seeking education and economic opportunities. Next slide. In terms of the numbers at a glance, over 2 million Myanmar nationals have migrated internationally. They've primarily gone to Thailand, Malaysia, the United Kingdom, and Japan. Diaspora organizations range from groups of less than 30 members, and we found some groups with more than 3,000 members. Some diaspora organizations focus on a particular purpose, such as the promotion and realization of democracy in Myanmar, increasing women's participation in Myanmar society, and shared religious affiliation. The methodology for our real-time review was implemented over a 6-week period between November 2021 and January 2022. The real-time review was undertaken by a team of consultants from Alinea International, supported by a field researcher from Myanmar based on the border of Myanmar and Thailand. Next slide. The real-time review took a mixed methods approach with semi-structured interviews with 21 representatives of diaspora organizations, international humanitarian organizations, and crisis-affected people. The review also undertook social media monitoring of Facebook accounts from over 30 diaspora organizations over the 6-week period of the review. And here you can see the location of the social media accounts monitored during the review period. I will now hand over to my colleague Claire, who is going to take us through the diaspora response findings. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Chris. And as mentioned, my name is Claire and I'm an associate consultant with Alinea International. So in terms of findings, the diaspora response to the Myanmar crisis. So we found that all diaspora organisations that we interviewed were actively fundraising, and this was primarily done through community events and social media. And we did find through this social media monitoring that the global giving and donor box platforms were popular. In terms of determining need and allocating resources, smaller diaspora organisations tended to directly support their family groups, and larger organisations prioritised assistance through local partners and broader coordinated processes. So we did find that some of the diaspora organisations were part of federations or globally coordinated networks where they would meet regularly to discuss needs, and they would pool funds and then collectively respond in Myanmar. And funds were generally transferred to local partners, connections, and family members, but we found no evidence of goods being sourced through humanitarian organisations. So this figure represents the sorts of fundraising campaigns that were being run on social media. So as you can see, support for democracy activists was the main sort of fundraising campaign being run, as well as direct support to the National Unity Government, and then emergency relief such as food, medical supplies, and shelter, that sort of thing. There was also longer term education projects and support for IDPs. So continuing on, in terms of advocacy, we found that diaspora have advocated for adherence to human rights, increased international attention, and raised awareness of atrocities. So most diaspora were using Facebook for advocacy efforts, but we did also find evidence of in-person advocacy, whether this was organised protests or meetings with members of parliament or government officials. Through our interviews with humanitarian organisations, we did learn about the open letter that was signed by 500 diaspora organisations and delivered to US Congress, and this was noted as a very effective method of pushing the US government to act on Myanmar. In terms of online advocacy, this was largely along ethnic and geographic lines. So to give an example, diaspora groups who were from the Chin state region of Myanmar generally advocated for causes for people in Chin state. In terms of communication, again, Facebook was found to be a major method of communication, but diaspora organisations noted challenges communicating with people in Myanmar, and some diaspora have switched to communicating via other platforms considered to be more secure, such as Signal. So this figure shows the forms of advocacy on social media. So for the most part, the diaspora organisations monitored were sharing news reports from Myanmar of attacks or atrocities or human rights violations, followed by organised protests, media releases. Some of the diaspora organisations that we looked at were part of more formal research institutions, and so in response to different incidents occurring in Myanmar, they would produce media releases, followed by democracy activism, and then things like first-hand reports of humanitarian needs, joint statements, and online faith events. So moving on to coordination. So in terms of local partners, diaspora organisations coordinated with local operational partners such as community-based organisations and churches, identifying needs and channeling financial and other humanitarian assistance through them. Pardon. Partnerships are formed through personal connections, previous visits to Myanmar, word of mouth, or mutual contacts on social media. And in many cases, these were long-term partnerships. So with regards to coordination between diaspora organisations, this occurred primarily along ethnic lines, while smaller diaspora organisations have limited global networks, all expressed a desire to coordinate. And of course, some larger groups were highly coordinated globally, as discussed previously with those federations and global coordination networks. So we found through our interviews almost no coordination between the diaspora and the international humanitarian response. And international humanitarian actors have not matched diaspora organisations supporting the humanitarian response. But we did find through the interviews that the diaspora had noted a number of potential benefits to coordination, including connections to individuals and communities on the ground, information sharing for access to real-time knowledge of the situation on the ground, access to larger scale logistics, and strengthened advocacy. So diaspora also noted a number of challenges. So diaspora groups in border countries were required to keep a low profile to maintain greater freedom of operations. These groups often have access to sensitive information, which could lead to harm if shared with the wrong people. Diaspora themselves often not well coordinated and have different priorities for advocacy and assistance. And finally, diaspora do not classify their assistance in terms of international humanitarian principles, which was an issue raised by humanitarian organisations. So moving on to accountability of the humanitarian response. So with regards to accountability to donors and contributors, diaspora organisations largely reported informal accountability systems. So this was largely through word of mouth or sharing receipts, making posts about how funding has been expensed on Facebook. But we did find that there were security concerns and capacity issues which restrict the ability to implement more formal accountability systems. And through our interviews with humanitarian organisations, we did find concerns around the accountability of diaspora groups. In terms of recipients of assistance, so according to diaspora, understanding of local needs meant that their responses were relevant. However, they did note that they had difficulties in providing assistance quickly, and so couldn't categorise their assistance as timely. The reasons given for this were because many of these groups are volunteer-led and don't have a pool of funds to draw on. So when responding to incidents or particular crises, there's sort of an extended process of fundraising and advocating, and so it's difficult to provide assistance in a timely manner. So moving on to gender considerations. So none of the diaspora organisations that we interviewed that were based in Australia or the US reported considering the differing needs of women and men when providing humanitarian assistance. However, women-focused organisations prioritise the needs of women and children, with support to the wider population a secondary priority. So the sorts of assistance provided by these women-focused organisations included education, critical non-food items, health services and protection, and safety was identified as the main concern for women. I'll now just pass back to my colleague, Chris.
Thanks, Claire. In this final section of the presentation, we'll have a look at the review recommendations and the ways forward for diaspora organisations. Some of the key challenges facing diaspora organisations are funding and other resources, as well as access. Moving forward, we heard clearly from diaspora organisations that they seek to strengthen the advocacy and international attention on the suffering and needs of the people of Myanmar, secure support for improved access, raise more funds collectively to meet life-saving and protection needs, and improve access to data and data security to support understanding of needs, how to operate, and support fundraising. Some of the key recommendations from the review are protecting the unique value of diaspora organisations. Diaspora organisations have information, access, and capabilities that international humanitarian organisations do not. This is often due to their existence outside of the formal international humanitarian system. Another recommendation is to informally connect to progress mutual objectives of information, advocacy, access, and inclusive assistance. To formally connect where it is safe to do so, to engage in mutually beneficial ways, and to be explicit about the impact of humanitarian principles. International humanitarian organisations who aim to adhere to humanitarian principles might need to explain what this means for their ability to engage with diaspora organisations upfront. This is going to make it a lot easier for international humanitarian organisations to determine how they might be able to engage going forward. Going back to the recommendation on informal connections, some of the examples we have here are research with the objective of raising awareness and connecting diaspora organisations, such as this review, might be one way of supporting this efficiently. Also connecting generalist diaspora organisations with organisations focused specifically on the needs of women and girls for information and opportunity sharing. Diaspora organisations would like to plan for the coming 6 months and seek engagement with the international community to do so. And we also recommend that humanitarian organisations prioritise mapping diaspora organisations responding to the crisis in Myanmar. And some potential formal connections, connecting the international with the local. Diaspora organisations are well connected with communities and community organisations within Myanmar. They may be able to assist international organisations to identify community organisations operating on the ground. Connecting the diaspora with the private sector. The private sector is increasingly engaged in international humanitarian assistance. It often has resources, but may lack the local connections and information. And we finally felt that we could draw on the UN's engagement and coordination with the private sector for disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. There are many similarities between the private sector and diaspora in that they are very keen to engage and will often do so regardless of the international humanitarian architecture. They both offer unique value to the response, but do not necessarily adhere to humanitarian principles. Thanks very much, and I'll now hand back to Bea and Alexandra for the Q&A section.
Thank you, Christina. Yes, I can see that so far there are no questions in the Q&A, so please write your questions. I think one just arrived actually. Would you mind asking, have you witnessed situation where diaspora organizations were able to provide assistance where institutional humanitarian actors were not? That's the first question that we received in the Q&A.
I might pass this question over to our local researcher, Mon, who's also on the line.
Sorry, please could you repeat the questions again?
Yes, if you have witnessed situation where diaspora organizations were able to provide assistance where institutional actors were not, didn't have access or were not present.
Yeah, there are many situations that we interviewed, like for example, many of the international organizations were not able to access, like in the jungle areas. In those cases, many of the diaspora organizations from Thailand side, they are really accessing through engaging with the EAOs in that area. So they are really supporting. Yeah.
And then we have another question. Thank you, Man, for your answer. About the coordination and the connection that can be done. Are the DOs, the diaspora organization, generally organized through a representative, head, or similar, so that could facilitate and ease this collaboration and coordination?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So it's extremely varied depending on the size of the diaspora organization. But as we sort of mentioned in the presentation, some of the diaspora are part of these very well organized and very coordinated networks or federations. And so some of them do have leaders, for example, the Institute of Chin Affairs. So there are definitely many ways of access with these sort of wider networks.
Maybe linked to that, Claire, if you could expand a little bit on the differences, if you have seen them among the different diasporas, because you have been looking at diaspora organizations that are based more in the region across the borders, but also in Australia, in the US. Did you see any differences in how they are structured, how the setup is, and how they are coordinated with each other? Like, do we have regional clusters, or is it more that globally they link with each other along the ethnic lines? How is that?
Yeah, yep. So just as you say, primarily along ethnic and geographic lines. I didn't see any regional clusters. We did find with Australia that Australian diaspora organizations were coordinated with each other, but they were also part of these global networks, which included diaspora from across Europe, North America, Asia as well. Mon, do you have anything to add on that in terms of the diaspora from Thailand?
Yeah, I heard that they have a kind of coordination, but not very regularly, but based on the urgencies and on the recent crisis. So they do have this kind of connection and coordination among the diaspora organization. But those are already existed very long, so that they know each other already. Yeah, those organizations have this kind of coordination.
And did you also identify some key influencer or key individuals outside organized diaspora? So like very important influencers or key persons within the diaspora that were active?
Yeah, I found. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go, Mon.
Yeah, I found that there are many influencers among the diaspora organization. They are very passionately working for the people in Myanmar long ago, I think, so that they are really very influencing people among the diaspora organization. Absolutely, yes.
Claire, you wanted to add something?
Just that some of the diaspora organizations were more influential than others, and sort of particularly the ones that were leading the global coordination networks as well.
And were these, would you say, rather the long established ones that have been well structured and organized, or do you also see smaller diaspora organizations that have recently in the last years come to grow and have already gained influential? Like, what did you identify any factors that make them more influential?
Yeah, from what I could see through the interviews and also through the social media monitoring, it did look like those diaspora groups that were more like formal research institutions and had sort of stronger connections on the ground and understanding of needs, and maybe sort of a more formalized purpose, were more influential.
And we have another very specific questions about to know more about the long-term education of IDPs in Chin state. I don't know if it was, I mean, you mentioned the education, but you didn't specify this in this specific state, but the question is, yeah, to know more about that, if there is any information on that.
Yeah, just briefly, this was in reference to a project that is being run in an IDP camp. So I believe that it was already a long-standing project, and I'm not sure if it was specifically in Chin State. It might have been a Karen project, but this had been ongoing with this particular diaspora organization for a few years and had recently ramped up in response to the crisis. That's about all the information I have on that particular project.
Thank you. I might also have one about the accountability. So how does it actually work between the community that the recipients, the one that receive, and the diaspora organization. So how does it actually this system works, so that they know they have some information about the delivery and if it's corresponding to the needs and so forth?
Yeah, so sort of as we mentioned in the presentation, it is very informal, and particularly for smaller diaspora organizations, they are largely delivering assistance to family members and that sort of thing. So the sorts of examples that were given in interviews were that, you know, they would receive a phone call or potentially a receipt. Every now and then they might receive photos to confirm that assistance has been reached by particular communities. But again, it is highly informal and there is quite a large element of trust. Having said that, that is for smaller organizations. And of course, I think, Mon, you had interviewed a few organizations who had sort of more formal accountability systems, but also that there were security concerns around those. Do you think you could elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's when some organizations that I interviewed, they said they know the accountability system, but the situation is not really favorable for them to do that, to apply it. Yeah, because in some situation they have to come and get and then go back quickly because of their security reason on the way. So that's some of the organizations say that like they are not settled yet to do such a large amount of accountability system in not like a camp situation at this point. So they are fleeing. So at this time of situation, it's very hard for them to do the accountability standard, even though they know. But some of the organizations, purely the smaller diaspora organizations, they don't have much knowledge on accountability. That is true, yeah.
So some more questions are popping up. So did you notice any regional specificities or disparities in terms of numbers or influence of diaspora organizations? Has there been any shift in the coalitions built by diaspora organizations post-coup?
I think just a general note on this is that from my perspective, the diaspora that are located closest to Myanmar, so along the border regions, were perhaps more formalized and were able to respond more thoroughly than those that are located in various parts of the world, such as Australia or in the US. Mon, do you have any perspective on that question?
I don't have clear answer for that. Yeah, sorry.
But so did you see if I mean, if there were any organization that actually were created just after the last year, after the 1st of February, or were there long-term organization, or was it a mixed group?
Yeah, very mixed. For many of the organizations whose focus was on democracy, we found that they had previously been very active, and then up until the coup last year, they had focused on longer term development projects. And once the coup had occurred, they had shifted to humanitarian assistance and democracy activism. So that was probably a pattern that we saw across those democracy-focused organizations.
Okay, another question. How do you see what the major challenge in the field setting would be if you think about the future work of diaspora in Myanmar, particularly in 2022?
I might leave this one with Mon. What do you think, Mon, in your experience?
The major challenge, like it's still this, according to this, the current situation, the fightings in everywhere, that still it is very hard to for the diaspora organization to apply the humanitarian standards in that situation, even though they want to coordinate, or they want to get more fundings from the international agencies, but that there are the major challenges that the meeting the requirements of the international agencies requirements. Yeah, that will be a big challenge. I feel like that. Yeah. Still, because of the security on the ground, security concern, they may not be able to share the things that most of the donor wants. So that could be a big challenge.
Okay.
Maybe just, if I may jump in there and ask a little more, because I know you looked into this, really the funding streams as well, and where does the money come from that diaspora then uses to implement their project. So have you seen any access from diaspora organizations to institutional donor funding? Is that something that interests them? Is that something that they are trying, or is it rather that they say, no, we want to remain with the donor basis being the diaspora communities abroad? Like, what is the lines you have seen there?
I feel like, sorry, go ahead, Clara.
Oh, no, Mon, you go and then I'll go.
Okay, like they really want to, they really need the help from the international agencies because they are really exhausted, yeah, for having no regular fundings. So they really want to engage, yeah.
Yeah, just kind of confirming what Mon said as well, just that we found that diaspora organizations were extremely keen to try and get funding through various different methods, including through those more formal organizations. And some of them had identified that they were trying to do so, but none had been successful so far.
Then it leads to another question that came into the chat. So how can diaspora members help in the present attempt to work through localization of NGOs or donors? So considering the access and the challenges to operate in Myanmar, so how could that be facilitate this?
I can maybe offer some more macro observations around this, and perhaps it is a two-way street. It goes two ways. I think for the localization, when we talk about localization, there's certainly a need for the humanitarian community to engage around how to manage risk and approaches to things like compliance and contracting. I think there's also potentially some incentives maybe around donor programs valuing and rewarding engagement of diaspora organizations. And perhaps, when we talk about the Grand Bargain 2.0 and, where these different work streams are continuing on in their work, and where diaspora organizations might also fit in there. So I think it's, for us, we're seeing through the review, there was opportunities for change within different parties, not that it was resting entirely on the shoulders of one organization, if I can put it that way.
And I also add on one thing here. I remember that one of the interviews, she said that even they will get the funding from international agencies. If there are many requirements for the reporting, then it is very hard for them to accept that funding. It will give them more headache while they are really having stress for the people on needs on the ground. That's one of the voices from the diaspora organizations, and quite interesting. Yeah, and then this kind of setting, this humanitarian crisis setting is quite complicated and very kind of trust is really needed in that situation, you know, instead of building on the, instead of focusing on the normal procedures, whether there is another way of that they can really work on the ground to help them to work on the ground. So this is a voice from one of the organizations I interviewed. Yeah.
Thanks. I think that's very valuable points, and good to hear the voice of the diasporas as well. I have one question, because we obviously focus also a lot on coordination, and you looked quite in depth on the different levels of coordination between diasporas and the local civil society organizations, but also between diaspora organizations and the institutional humanitarian actors. So I was wondering, if the institutional humanitarian actors and diaspora organizations would want to improve their coordination tomorrow or today, what would be the one thing or the one recommendation you could get them and tell them what is the one thing they could do immediately to enhance their coordination with each other, seeing that from all sides it was stressed that there is an interest in more coordination? What would be the recommendation you would give them?
To the diaspora organization?
To the diaspora organizations, and then maybe Chris and Claire, you want to add also to the institutional humanitarian actors, yes?
Okay, diaspora organizations, like in my point of view, when I worked on this research, it's very interesting for me too, because I came to know that they really need to enhance their coordination among themselves. But on the other hand, it is really good to have a good coordination. But on the other hand, because of the security reason, they cannot do, you know, freely. Even in Thailand side, they have to work on work with very low profile. So it is hard for them to do that, even they know it, even they want to do it widely, the coordination. Yeah, but still. They have to find a way how they can engage or coordinate among themselves and also to the humanitarian agency. Really sit together and find a solution. Yeah, that is, and also not only if they among the diaspora organization, after that they can escalate to the international agencies. Yeah.
Claire, Chris, anything to add on the one recommendation, how to enhance coordination? You have a couple of recommendations in the report upcoming, so.
Yeah, I think it's really that sort of immediate recommendation that we were talking about a mapping exercise. And although in the recommendation, the way we framed it, the onus is on the international humanitarian organizations, but again, we feel that there's an opportunity for that work to be undertaken mutually. There was so much interest and certainly so much goodwill and commitment coming through the review that, you know, this seemed like the logical next step was to undertake a bit of a mapping exercise and to bring these different stakeholders together inside Myanmar to better understand what each other is doing.
Okay, so we have some more questions before we will end this webinar. So there is a long one here, but I think an interesting one. Did you measure the level of trust between the potential beneficiaries and these diaspora organizations, particularly those that are located near the border? How do these diaspora organizations ensure that the support received through them can be channeled to the most vulnerable on the ground? Can we rely on these diaspora organizations to help with the so-called humanitarian corridors, if this could ever be created? Thank you.
This is a very interesting question, and I also question about that. True, yeah. So, like for example, I also asked that questions to the interviewees, and then I also could visit it to one of the distribution sites. So that was so amazing experience for me too. So I found out that they try to reach out through their volunteers, their networks. They are there. And it is amazing that because, for example, one of the diaspora organization in Thailand areas, they also have their volunteers in the ground. And also likewise, some of the organizations with long presence, long existing in the past also have their people on the ground. They are working directly. So not through, not indirectly assistance. So it is very interesting that they have their people on the ground. They have a channel to go through to that area. So, I mean, which is not very legally, but they are across the border, and then also they are trying to reach out. They are not sitting in the Thailand side or other areas. They are also trying to reach out to those areas as much as possible. So, like, I also
the connection is dropping.
I think we might have lost Mon.
Claire, if you want to, until we get, Mon is back, I think.
Sorry, I'm lost. The connection is bad here. I don't know why. Yeah, so they have their network on the ground. Yeah, so I also interviewed some.
Okay, so that's unfortunate.
I think we might have lost Mon again. Yeah, just to sort of continue with what she was saying, I think from my perspective, again, a lot of what the diaspora organizations do, particularly the smaller ones, is based on trust. And because so much of the humanitarian assistance is provided to local communities, local connections, and family members, trust is often a large part of that. And so reporting is extremely informal. Mon is back. I don't know. Mon, do you want to continue with where you were?
I'm terribly sorry for this internet connection. I don't know what happened today in Bangkok. It's strange. Yeah, so I mean that we really cannot say the trust of the beneficiaries, but the beneficiaries are really happy for getting that assistance. They are really looking for those assistances. Without at this point, they really cannot say they are satisfied, or they don't have any feeling at this point. They just know it. They have to receive the food assistance, and I can assure that most of the organizations or most of the individuals donors, they have the connection on the ground. They are making sure that the beneficiary receive. They have this kind of passions working for this, especially for this crisis, and especially for this situation where not many agencies are able to support. So they have this kind of community spirit. This is very impressive thing I found among the diaspora organizations and the beneficiaries. Yeah.
But yeah, on the distribution side, the selection of the most vulnerable groups, how is it done? So that because we've seen with other diaspora groups how this was done, and here would be quite interesting. Do they? Are there any distinctions of targeting the most vulnerable ones, or is it? Yeah, how does it work?
In my understanding, that they are all in the same situation. Most of the IDPs, they are the most richer. The person who is richer, the loss is much bigger than the people who don't have anything. So this is, though they are fleeing together in the jungle or in the square somewhere. So even they put some amount of money for providing food at this time of situation. So they are the one providing assistance or helping their people on the ground. So I don't really feel that the most vulnerable, finding out the most vulnerable is not really applicable in that situation, because everybody needs food. So this is a current situation of the IDPs. But I think in some subtle camp, like in one of the EAOs, they really could focus on the women and children. So like, for example, they could provide the nutrition assistance. So they could find out that there are needs for the most vulnerable children, in the camp. So they try to put more efforts to those vulnerable people. Yes.
Thank you. I will then take two more questions, and then so have there been any evidence or indication that diaspora organizations complement each other when diaspora could not offer specific assistance or reach a particular area, that another diaspora stepped in to help?
In my according to the interview results, I found out that some of the organizations are leading in coordination, even in Thailand side, and also in one of the EAOs. So they have this humanitarian assistance coordination system. They have it. So they try to exchange information, like women organization will do this part and the other organization will do this part. They have this kind of system, coordination system. And but one of the things that they cannot control is individual donors coming through by their own. So they don't know that coordination system. They just came in and then they just wanted to help. So they go directly by themselves. Those systems cannot be controlled, not to be overlapped. But they try among the organizations that they have this kind of coordination system, not to overlap. Yeah.
That's interesting. Thank you. Last questions, because the other is more comment that I can read afterward. Did you identify any specific advocacy needs, support required, and how INGOs could support so that diaspora have specific advocacy needs and support?
Not any specific advocacy needs, but there was, across the interviews, there was sort of a regular pattern of diaspora organizations finding that, news reports and stories from Myanmar were far and few between in Western media, and there was a perception that partnering with INGOs could lead to amplification of humanitarian needs and the sorts of support that could be given by individuals and organizations.
Thank you. So I will just read a comment from a participant that want to agree on the standpoint of diaspora on humanitarian assistance, despite not meeting the international standards, given that Myanmar has a very unique situation. While trying to meet those standards, implications include detailed reporting, recording, and categorization of beneficiaries, which may hinder the actual provision of humanitarian assistance to those in need. Thank you for that comment. I think all the researchers will agree on that comment. We also do. So thank you for that. And then if there are no further questions, I will hand over to Alexandra. And first of all, I want to thank Christina, Claire, and Mont for answering all those questions, and also for the presentation and research. Thank you very much. Alexandra, over to you.
Thanks a lot. And yeah, 3 minutes left, I think perfectly in time. I also just would, first of all, a big thank you to everyone for joining today and for sharing your questions and comments. That's been really interesting. And I think we are all looking very much forward to the final report. Thanks also to Chris, Claire and Mon. And also the DEMAC team behind the scenes. There is always a team that makes the job. So the technical support and everything else, I think that's also definitely worth highlighting. You can find the final report as of 15th of February on the DEMAC website. My colleagues will share the link in the chat as well. We already have the executive summary uploaded and available with some recommendations, more details and more in-depth research than 15th of February. And with that, I would like to say a big thank you and have a nice day, evening, night, wherever you are. And thank you very much for joining us today. Bye.